Let's do it. Let's do it. Broadcasting from around the world, you're listening to The First 100, a podcast on how founders acquired their first 100 paying customers. Here's your host, Hadi Radwan.
Good to have you on the show, Dan. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for stopping by. We have an interesting episode because Dan Roselli is the co-founder of Revtech Labs, which is the first and the oldest incubator in Charlotte. And you focus primarily on general tech in the emerging hot sector. But Dan also has started more than 6 other companies, including Revtech Capital, which is a fintech fund based out of Charlotte as well, and Queen City Fintech, and many more. So, Dan, welcome to the show. Take us back to the early days. Did young Dan exhibit any signs of early entrepreneurship?
You know, it's funny. I always talked about being an entrepreneur, but I actually talk about my career in 3 phases. The first phase was big company marketing. So General Mills, Colgate Palmolive, M&M Mars. And then how I got to Charlotte is I took a job as the brand and advertising executive for Bank of America. So I ran brand strategy for B of A globally. It got us to Charlotte. I learned financial services, was on the operating committee of the bank. So I saw how a Fortune 10 operating committee works, which is just a fantastic experience early in my career. And in the second phase of my career, I actually became an entrepreneur because we wanted to stay in Charlotte. Sarah Roselli, who's my wife and co-founder and business partner, we have 2 sets of boy-girl twins. So I'm sure all your listeners will be fascinated by that. We fell in love with Charlotte and really wanted to stay here. So became an entrepreneur. Ended up as a co-founder of one of our fintech unicorn companies, a company called Red Ventures. Spun a company out of that and then started 2 other companies. So I've co-founded 3 different companies that have made it on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing private U.S. companies. So not that many people have done that, and you add that to the big company experience, and maybe that's interesting. But then the third phase of my career, which we're really here to talk about today, was building the tech and entrepreneurship community in Charlotte. So in 2010, the middle of the great financial crisis, Sarah and I did a crazy thing that only entrepreneurs would do. We bought an empty downtown office building to turn into Charlotte's tech and entrepreneurship center. So it's a lot like Plug and Play in Sunnyvale, if your listeners have been out there or know of that. We went out and visited Saeed. He was a couple of years ahead of us, but a very similar model. So I'll sometimes refer to what we do as the Plug and Play of the Carolinas. And then from that platform, we just took one step after another. We started the accelerator program, Revtech Labs and QC Fintech in the fintech and insurtech space, and then the venture capital firm to help support those companies. So it's been a fantastic journey for the last 14 years. But whether there were some early hints in my childhood of entrepreneurship, maybe because I think I was always a restless child. So maybe this was fate.
Amazing story. If you go back to the early days of the incubator, so you have this empty place that you've rented out. What's next? What does someone who wants to build an incubator do in that case?
Well, so it's funny. A lot of the work that we did at Packard Place, I describe as a really large community crowdsourced project. The community came and rallied around what we needed to do. And back in 2011, some tech leaders came and said, we're bleeding entrepreneurial young talent out of Charlotte that thinks they have to go to Raleigh or to Atlanta or Boulder. Why don't we do an accelerator? The senior people will benefit, network, pay it forward. The junior people get the benefit of that networking, and we'll raise the flag for technology in Charlotte. I said, great, let's do it. What's an accelerator? And so we started an accelerator without any right or background or knowledge or expertise, kind of like that entrepreneurial journey. It's the pursuit of opportunity. So we launched an accelerator. 5 local companies came in. No money went in. No equity came out. But I realized that's what we needed to go build next. So in the next class 2, 10 companies were in. Demo day was twice as large. It was all great. And we were debriefing afterwards. We said, we paid all the expenses of the program, charged no rent, volunteered all of our time, have no sponsors, and we have no equity. Like, well, that would be the definition of an unsustainable business model. And so we said we either need to turn it over and let it be a small volunteer thing, or we get in the professional accelerator game. And that's what we did. And we asked ourselves the question of being in Charlotte, North Carolina, where can we go and compete and win on a national and international level? Charlotte's the second largest financial capital in the United States, if your listeners don't know that. And so we had tens of thousands of potential mentors, potential entrepreneurs, dozens of companies in the space. So we started talking about fintech and doing a fintech accelerator before that word really caught on. And like every entrepreneurial journey, got a little lucky that we were just well positioned and then rode that wave as fintech became a very hot space in the entrepreneurial tech and venture capital community.
Amazing. I mean, if you look at the different ingredients, you need entrepreneurs, you need mentors, you need an infrastructure, you need capital.
Right.
How do you look at all of these four different layers when you're starting? Where do you start first? Do you build the infrastructure? Do you find startups? What's your secret sauce?
There is no secret sauce. The answer is I am an entrepreneur at heart and have that type A personality. And it's just, this has been built by 14 years of sheer personal will force, right? We have by background and by resources, had no credibility to be able to go what we did and do what we did. We just did it anyways. So, I mean, the building and the Entrepreneurship Center gave us that platform. And as I joked, we didn't know how to run an accelerator. We figured it out. We're bright people. The same way I learned how to run an Entrepreneurship Center, having never done it before, we learned how to run an accelerator, having never done it before. Even when it came to trying to make our demo days larger, it was hard back 12 years ago to get investors and other people to come to an hour-long demo day of 6 young companies. And so being a scrappy entrepreneur, we cheated. We said, all right, let's do a thought leadership day on innovation, and we'll get 200, 300 people, all the right butts in the seats from all the big banks and community banks and ecosystem partners. And then we'll just Trojan horse our demo day for the class in once we have everyone captive in the space. And so we backed into doing 2 major events a year in Charlotte, FinTech and InsurTech Generations in June and Venture 135 in November. And we backed into being an events company because we needed to build our demo days. So it's just scrappiness and finding the opportunities, putting one foot in front of the other. And that's how we did it. No secret sauce, hard work, sweat.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to think about your first acquisition channel, how did you find these startups to join your cohort?
Yeah, so the first couple I mentioned were local. So we held information meetings and networked and asked people to refer. As we built to recruit on a national and international level, that's a much different challenge. We reached out, we're on class 20s about to start in a week. We reached out to over 12,000 fintech and insurtech startups around the world. Over 500 companies applied for our 15 slots. So low single-digit acceptance rates. And people always ask the question of, oh my gosh, how do you get that many people apply? And the answer is we started with, back in class, 30 applicants, and then 70 applicants, and then 120. And we've just built a portfolio of, call it 40 different marketing tactics that we use. And there is no one, silver bullet, secret sauce. It's a lot of hustle over 40 tactics. Some of the good ones are direct outreach, obviously, but we also, for example, work with our venture firm partners, the 400 venture firms we've built relationships with. And what we always tell them is when you meet a founder that you like, but maybe probably too early for you to look at, rather than telling them no or come back in 9 months, it's like, hey, go check out what Dan and Sarah have built in Charlotte. This could be a great way for you to accelerate the growth of your company and get investment ready a little earlier than you might have otherwise done. And so things like that have been really successful for us.
That's an amazing story. I mean, there's a lot of value when you put it that way for a VC, right? But sometimes when you pitch it to a VC, they forget. So how do you ensure that 400 VCs can actually send you real leads and remember this? Is there anything that you've done that has worked for you?
Yeah, so I think you always have to think about how do you create a win for the person that you're interacting with. Truly want it to be a win in the interaction. And then you can also think about how it's a win for you, right? But that business Stephen Covey-ism of a win-win scenario is kind of how we think. And for us, what we do, we take that class of 15. When we bring them in, we brush up their investment one-pagers, package them, and send them out exclusively to folks who have decided to be partners of our program. So we're sending them really great deal flow, curated from over 500 startups that applied. And then we invite them to come to our 2 events where they get to see them present and they get kind of inside access to that. So the quid pro quo there is they're helping us market and recruit and looking at those companies to fund. And when they find people that fit in, they put them into our ecosystem as well. And once you start providing deal flow for venture capital firms, they pay attention to how they can help because it's a win for everyone.
Makes a lot of sense. What is an event or a crucible moment that you've passed in your incubator that could have led you the other way, not working around? Is there any moment you remember?
Yeah, more than we have time for. An interesting one is even in COVID, obviously every company tightened their purse strings, and a lot of our sponsors had to stop or pause sponsoring our program because it was an easy thing in the line item to cut, and it put the program at risk. And so we fundamentally reworked our model. One of the things we did is we took the accelerator and we had created a 501c3, so that's a nonprofit tax corporation under U.S. tax code. And we moved the accelerator into the nonprofit. So that gave us the ability to now go after corporate foundations and grants and other things that we didn't have access to before. I told this to all of our founders when COVID hit. My favorite quote of entrepreneurship is actually from a scientist. It's Charles Darwin. And the quote is that it's not necessarily the strongest or fastest species that survive. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. And that is just a fantastic definition of entrepreneurship. And also what we have to do here, right, in reacting to the market forces and where we can get support for our company. So that's one example, but it's just like any startup, it's building the plane while you're flying it. And certain weeks you're like, this is going to be a grand slam. And the next week you're like, oh, this is all going to crash and burn. And you have to be able to even those emotions out as an entrepreneur.
Amazing. That's a great way to put it. Is there a principle that you live by that has served you well on your journey in building the incubator and your venture fund as well?
Yeah, I think it has to be being founder-centric, right? You have to have a desire to truly want founders to succeed and to help founders if you're going to go run and start an accelerator program. You can't fake that authenticity. Now, I will also quick to follow. We are not perfect. We make mistakes all the time and we try and improve and get better, but it's got to start from a genuine place of, I care about entrepreneurs. I want to see them be successful. I know how hard that journey is. I know how important that journey is, not only for them and wealth creation for them, but for the creation of jobs. And I'm sure most of the jobs that are created, certainly in the US, and this is probably true globally, are created from entrepreneurs, right? The big companies are job shedders, not job creators. It's entrepreneurs that drive the economy in the US and in the free markets.
Amazing. There's two schools of thought here. One that says we focus first on founder, then product, then market. Then you have other VCs who says market is very important, then product, then founder. When you interview so many people and you have, like you mentioned, 12,000 applications, how do you vet your applications and how important is the founder in that story?
Yeah, we have a rubric that we look at. So we try and take the art form of finding great early stage companies and make it as scientific as we can, but there's still some art form in there. So the rubric we use has the highest weight by far on the founders and the founding team. That not only background and drive, but I'll call it sheer scrappiness. A founder has got to want it, right? They got to believe in what they're doing and the mission of their company, like in their core, because it is a hard journey. And I'll tell you, one of the red flags, it doesn't happen often, but we've had it from time to time. We'll ask a founder why they started the company. They're like, well, so I could have an exit and make a lot of money. Like, nope, that is the wrong answer, because that will not get you through the hard days. You got to believe in what you're doing so deeply that you're willing to go through the hard times to get there. So founders are most important. The debate of, is it founder or is it TAM and total addressable market? It's yes and, right? You can have a fantastic founder, and if they're in a small or shrinking category, it's really hard. And conversely, you could be in the hottest category there is, and if you aren't the founder that has that hustle, you're not going to succeed. You have to have both. You really do.
If you distill today few traits of a successful founder, because you've seen so many of the founders pass by, and you can look at how you've interviewed, the traits you've looked at, the criteria, and then you see if they were successful or not because of what happened later. Are there any specific traits that stand out for a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, more than anything else, it's that hustle, scrappiness factor that I talked about, right? It's when there's a loose ball on the floor, who's going to come up with it? And time again, that is the most important characteristic. Certainly experience they've had, if somebody can come to us and said, hey, I spent 20 years in the US bond market, and this has been a problem the entire time I've been there, and no one has gone to solve it. And I created this company to solve the problem that I experienced for 2 decades as an expert in this space. You're like, wow, even before you go out the door, you have some level of product market fit by somebody who lived in that marketplace, right? I love that story. So experience is certainly valid. The last thing I'll say, and this is an oldie but a goodie for your listeners who may not have read a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's probably 30 plus years old now. But he talks about, and he studied all these CEOs about what made them great leaders. And he talked about this thing called level 5 leadership. And he said there are two characteristics that they have that are seemingly opposites, but make sense when you think about it. And it's one, they have a brutally realistic hold of the facts as they are. Not as they want them to be, not as they believe them to be. They can look at the world as it is, which is a problem for founders sometimes, right? But the second thing is they have to have that sense of overwhelming optimism that with the resources and team they have, they can overachieve or achieve and overcome those problems. But when a founder starts off with a premise of not really seeing the landscape as it is, that worries me. And so I love founders who will come and say, these are the challenges that we have to face, and this is our plan for how we're going to overcome them. And I believe we can because of this, this, and this.
Makes a lot of sense. What's your favorite interview question for founders?
Oh, favorite interview question for founders. You know, this is a basic one, but I almost always start the conversation with this. And I ask them, what was the origin story of the company? Was it an idea? Was it a pain point you experienced? Was it something you saw as an opportunity? Because that question yields so much more than just how the company came to be. It tells me about the founders, their motivations, how they formed the foundation team. And it just tells me a whole lot more than maybe any other question I ask. And I also love hearing that answer because that answer, as having talked to thousands of entrepreneurs, I have rarely heard the same story twice. And that's what part makes entrepreneurship so fun, is it's a very unique and personal journey to every founder. I'll tell a quick story. There's a founding team that I really liked that was early in our program that were the first students that dropped out of college to join our program. And I was really nervous about that at the time. We were very young. And I said, all right, we'll let you in the program under one condition. You don't tell your parents that you dropped out of college for my program. You tell them you're taking a sabbatical. So if it doesn't work out, you can go back around, because I didn't want that pressure on my shoulders and having their parents come in and yell at me. But the motivation for every founder and why they start is just different.
Amazing. On your LinkedIn, you mentioned you know about M&Ms and tequila as much as anyone else in the world. Tell us first something interesting about M&Ms and then on tequilas.
Oh, fantastic. I say that because I used to be the marketing director for M&Ms, the candy, and also for Sauza Tequila in one of the companies that I worked for. And the reason I say that on my LinkedIn profile, by the way, is I believe in the power of stories. And this is really true for entrepreneurs, right? People remember stories. They don't remember facts. And everyone I've talked to who looked at my LinkedIn profile pulls on that thread. And you got to make yourself stand out. So there's a marketing story in there too. M&Ms. The most interesting thing, right? They fresh roast the peanuts when they make peanut M&Ms, and you can get them when you work at the factory right off the line. And the peanut inside the M&M is still warm from the roasting, and it is absolutely fantastic and very hard to eat peanut M&Ms ever again that you buy in a store, because it's not nearly the same as getting them fresh off the line. On tequila, I will tell you that I think it's interesting. Most people know that there's a standard of identity for all food products, right? It's why American chocolate tastes different than European chocolate. Well, back when there was an agave shortage in the 60s, which is what tequila is made out of, the Mexican government changed the standard of identity for tequila from 100% agave, which the good tequilas still are, to 51% agave, which is why some of them taste awful. But there was a really ingenious woman who realized the American tourist didn't like the 51% agave, so she mixed it with some fruit juice to make it taste better. Do you know what her name is? Margarita. There you go. There's your tequila story.
Thank you very much. So I think if you were commissioned to start a competitor to M&Ms, do you think it's more important to nail the product or the marketing part of it?
Tough question. I still am going to say the marketing of it, which will disappoint some people, I imagine. I am a big believer in having a quality product that has real value. But I've seen a lot of quality products not succeed. And I've seen some average products succeed through better marketing and better positioning, right? The first law of marketing, and in my core, I'm a marketer. The first law of marketing is perception is reality, not reality is reality. I got to go with the marketing answer on that one.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. One last question. What's next, Dan?
The journey we're on is going to continue. We've been ranked 4 times as a finalist for top global fintech accelerator, and we haven't won yet. And so I'm starting to feel like Susan Lucci. So people who are older will get that reference. She was a daytime soap opera star that got nominated like 19 times before she won her Emmy. And so we're going to win. So I'll put that out there. We're raising our second venture capital fund. We'll continue doing that work and continue growing our fund size, growing our impact. Third, we believe strongly in creating a really diverse founder base. I mentioned Sarah Garces Roselli, my co-founder and wife and business partner. We're one of the very few majority Latina-owned fintech accelerators and fintech venture funds in the country. We've always believed that given a truly level playing field, you will get a very diverse group of founders. So as competitive as that application process is that I talked about, we're very purposeful about recruiting a very diverse class of people, and then we let the chips fall out where the chips fall out in the selection process. And we've ended up with over half of our companies having a female founder or founder of color on the team, which is really hard to do in the fintech space vis-a-vis the other statistics. And we've been doing it for 12 years now and over 200 companies. So it's not a short-term recent thing for us. It's a long-term trend. And we believe it's the right thing to do. You probably know the stats that in the United States, over 90% of venture capital still goes to men. Over 90% of venture capital still goes to white people. I think Black women, achieve 1% or less of all venture capital in America. It's just a pure capitalistic waste of resources when you have fantastic founders of all genders, of all colors, of all backgrounds. We ought to be tapping that level of innovation wherever it comes from and whatever it looks like. And that is a much better free market system and a way to maximize return for investors, in our opinion.
Amazing. One last question for the entrepreneurs listening. Is there any specific trend or industry or sector that you would like someone to focus on, or even a problem that exists that you're looking for entrepreneurs to solve?
Well, I'll give this piece of advice, right? Because everyone's talking about AI now. 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was talking about blockchain. And what I tell founders, and some of them still get it wrong, 5 years ago, half the people that pitched said, we're a blockchain company. And I'm like, no, you're not. There is no such thing as a blockchain company. You are a payments company doing P2P payments using blockchain to facilitate that movement, right? But you are not a blockchain company. It is a tool. And we still get founders now that the first words out of their mouth are, we're an AI company doing this. I look at them and I'm like, no, you're not. So getting founders to understand that problem solution is still the core. Tell me what the problem is that you are fixing. Tell me why your solution is better. And you can use AI as part of that rationale and the solution, but that doesn't make you an AI company. It means you're utilizing AI to facilitate a problem and solution. So that would be my advice.
Dan, thank you for stopping by. This was an amazing episode. How can people reach you, and when does the new cohort start if someone wants to apply?
Yeah, so we recruit twice a year. So you can go to revtechlabs.co on the website. So we're accepting applications probably 9 months out of the year. And if not, you can get on the wait list. So that's number one. And I encourage people to apply, right? There's lots of people that applied once and then got farther along and got in the program. And you can't possibly get in unless you take the shot and apply, right? And then in terms of reaching me, I'm Dan Roselli on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. So please just put a note in there that, hey, I heard the podcast and wanted to connect. I'm happy to connect openly with anyone who references this podcast.
Amazing. We'll put all of this in the show notes, and we wish you the best of luck on your journey.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the chat.
Thank you so much for listening to the First 100. We hope it inspired you in your journey. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify, and share it with a friend starting their entrepreneurship journey. Leave us a 5-star review. Your support will help spread our podcast to more viewers.